Welcome to International Trade Minute, quickfire trade news, the essential podcast for today's trade professionals, presented to you by Rydell Law Firm. If you're a seasoned practitioner, this is where you'll find your weekly distilled briefing on the pulse of international commerce and regulation. We bring you the latest legal and trade news, distilled into straightforward, bite-sized updates for busy trade professionals. Sponsored by Rydell Law Firm, this podcast is crafted by expert trade attorneys to keep you ahead of the curve with concise, actionable insights. Perfect for your morning commute or coffee break. Stay informed without the fluff. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and join our professional community on LinkedIn. Today we'll explore key developments in CBP entry processes, proposed tariff strategies, de minimis rule changes, sanctions enforcement, and updates to the U.S. munitions list. Let's get started. We are starting with a significant development for trade practitioners. CBP has proposed replacing the Type 86 process for low-value packages with what they're calling an enhanced entry process. This new framework will require importers to provide additional data elements beyond the current 10 required fields, while maintaining the voluntary nature of the program. Breaking down the key changes, CBP's proposal includes requirements for a clearance tracing identification number, country of shipment details, and notably HTS codes, though waivers will be available for filers with proven track records in managing PGA requirements. The enhanced process will also demand marketplace product listing URLs or product images, SKU information, and foreign security scanning reports. For those handling marketplace imports, you'll need to provide more detailed product descriptions, comprehensive seller information, and complete purchaser data. The agency is also mandating marketplace identification and website information as part of the enhanced requirements. What's particularly noteworthy for practitioners is that mail shipments, previously ineligible for Type 86 electronic entries, will now qualify for this enhanced entry process. However, be aware that mail shipments will operate under different advanced data filing deadlines, specifically no later than the departure date from the origin country. CBP estimates the cost impact of transitioning from Type 86 to these enhanced requirements will be minimal, approximately 1 cent per shipment. The agency emphasizes that clearing goods off the manifest, which currently accounts for nearly 40% of de minimis entries, will remain permissible under the final rule. For trade professionals managing high-volume import operations, it's important to note that these changes are part of a broader two-pronged approach. A second rule is expected shortly that will specifically address restrictions on goods eligible for duty-free entry. CBP indicates these enhanced data requirements are necessary groundwork for implementing broader reforms in the de minimis space. Now, we are turning to a significant policy development. Treasury Secretary nominee Scott Bessent has outlined a three-tier approach to tariffs under a potential second Trump administration. During his recent Senate Finance Committee testimony, Bessent provided crucial insights into how trade practitioners should prepare for potential shifts in tariff strategy. First and foremost, Bessent described tariffs aimed at remedying unfair trade practices, whether at industry or countrywide levels. This category would encompass traditional trade remedies, Section 232 tariffs on aluminum and steel, and Section 301 tariffs targeting specific nations like China. The second category introduces a broader approach, with tariffs serving as a federal revenue generation tool. While Bessent didn't specify exact rates, it's worth noting that current tariff collections represent just 2.4% of federal revenue in fiscal year 2024. The third category presents perhaps the most novel approach, using tariffs as leverage for non-trade policy objectives. Bessent cited the potential 25% tariff on Mexican imports over fentanyl smuggling as an example of this strategy. He noted that this approach could serve as an alternative to sanctions, which the administration views as potentially undermining dollar dominance. Addressing inflation concerns, Bessent argued that any negative price impacts from new tariffs would be partially offset by several factors: a likely 4% dollar appreciation, reduced consumer demand for more expensive goods, and potential price cuts by foreign manufacturers, particularly Chinese firms trying to maintain market share during their economic challenges. For practitioners monitoring specific sectors, Besant showed openness to novel approaches, including potential carbon border adjustments. He specifically indicated willingness to work on strategies targeting both carbon-related concerns and unfair trade practices, suggesting a more nuanced approach to tariff policy than previously anticipated. The nominee's testimony signals that trade professionals should prepare for a potentially more complex tariff environment, where duties serve multiple policy objectives beyond traditional trade remediation. Up next, CBP has unveiled a sweeping proposed rule that would fundamentally reshape the de minimis landscape. According to CBP's analysis, approximately 77% of shipments currently entering under de minimis would become subject to duties, with an average duty rate of 21.2%. The core of this change centers on goods subject to Section 301 tariffs, which would no longer qualify for de minimis entry. To implement this change, CBP is proposing mandatory 10-digit harmonized tariff schedule codes for all packages, including those cleared off manifest. This represents a notable departure from current practices and would affect both standard clearances and the enhanced entry stream. The economic implications are substantial. CBP projects additional costs to consumers ranging from $10 billion to $18 billion in 2025, depending on how importers adjust their supply chains. The agency anticipates collecting between $5.9 billion and $7.8 billion in new tariff revenues, with the variation reflecting potential changes in consumer demand due to higher prices. For smaller retailers and e-commerce businesses, this could drive a shift away from direct-to-consumer shipping models. CBP acknowledges that many importers may pivot to consolidated bulk shipments to reduce per-unit costs, potentially restructuring current supply chain strategies. The impact on lower-income households warrants particular attention. As academic studies indicate, these consumers tend to purchase more frequently from platforms like Temu and Shein. CBP estimates these households could face 25% higher financial impacts compared to typical households, though the overall inflationary effect is projected to be modest, between 1/3 and 0.5% on imported goods. For trade practitioners, key action items include preparing clients for increased compliance requirements, particularly around HTS classification, and developing strategies to manage the transition from direct shipment to potential bulk import models. The 60-day comment period provides an opportunity to address specific industry concerns before implementation. Notably, the rule's handling of international mail remains uncertain, with CBP specifically requesting feedback on operational feasibility in the mail environment. This suggests potential carve-outs or separate rulemaking may follow for mail-based imports. We are diving next into a notable sanctions enforcement action. OFAC has levied a substantial fine exceeding $1 million against Miami-based Family International Realty, LLC, and its owner for orchestrating a sophisticated sanctions evasion scheme involving Russian oligarchs' luxury condominiums. The case centers on the firm's assistance to sanctioned Russian businessmen Viktor Perevalov and Valery Abramov in transferring their property holdings to non-sanctioned family members. The scheme began shortly after these individuals were sanctioned in 2018 for their involvement in construction projects in Russian-occupied Crimea. The firm's owner, Roman Sinyavsky, has pleaded guilty to criminal charges and agreed to forfeit over $182,000 in proceeds. Text messages obtained by OFAC revealed explicit acknowledgement of the sanctions implications, with Sinyavsky directly discussing ways to circumvent restrictions with the sanctioned individuals. The scheme involved multiple sophisticated tactics, including transferring property titles to shell companies, listing minor children as owners, and continuing to generate rental income from luxury properties. The firm managed to generate approximately $840,000 in rental revenues, while earning substantial commission fees for these services. OFAC deemed this case particularly egregious due to the willful nature of the violations and the substantial undermining of U.S. sanctions objectives. While the maximum penalty could have reached $30 million, OFAC settled on the lower amount considering the firm's financial condition and Sinyavsky's criminal plea. This enforcement action serves as a stark warning to real estate professionals and other gatekeepers about the risks of facilitating sanctions evasion. OFAC specifically emphasized that property interests of sanctioned individuals cannot be extinguished through sham transfers or attempts to obscure ownership, highlighting the need for enhanced due diligence in real estate transactions involving family members or associates of sanctioned parties. The State Department's Directorate of Defense Trade Controls has announced significant revisions to the U.S. munitions list, implementing both additions and removals of controlled items. These changes, set to take effect September 15th, reflect evolving military technology and commercial applications. Among the new additions are specific types of exoskeletons, certain nerve agents and defoliants, Pentagon-funded aircraft engines with their specially designed components, and 2 new classifications of uncrewed, untethered vessels and vehicles. These items have been deemed to require the stricter controls of the International Traffic in Arms regulations. For our concluding news, certain anti-jam antennas will be transferred to Commerce Department jurisdiction. This includes adjusting control parameters for beam switching and convergence time from seconds down to milliseconds, ensuring only the most sensitive technologies remain under ITAR control. The change particularly affects controlled reception pattern antennas for position, navigation, and timing, which will help improve civil navigation system resilience. DDTC has intentionally set a longer implementation period of 240 days to allow industry adaptation. For items transitioning to the Commerce Control List, exporters can begin positioning their license applications early. During the transition, both DDTC and the Bureau of Industry and Security will accept applications, though BIS won't issue approvals until the effective date. Existing license holders can maintain their current authorizations or seek new ones for transitioning items. The Directorate is actively seeking industry feedback until March 18th, particularly regarding definitions of controlled items and the scope of engine controls. This comprehensive update aims to modernize export controls while maintaining essential national security protections. Thanks for tuning in to International Trade Minute. We hope you found today's episode insightful and useful for your practice. Remember, our podcast is brought to you by Rydell Law Firm, your trusted partner in navigating international trade law. Don't miss our next episode. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Stay connected and continue the conversation with us on LinkedIn. Until next time, stay informed and stay ahead.